So every times when you see the term nominal, it's all about dollars, right? Then later on, when we were to look at real interest rates, then we say this is the interest rates in terms of baskets of goods. Now, they are different, right? So it is possible that nominal interest rates is higher. If let's say I save, right? I am a saver. So imagine I am a saver, right? So, or I say I am a lender. Therefore, when I keep my money in the bank, I receive nominal interest rate. So the one that I'm actually seeing is this guy. So let's suppose this nominal interest rates is 10%. And imagine now at time t, right? So at time t, let's say equals to 0. Okay, so this means now I have $100. Then later on at time t that is equals to 1, then I can actually say this is future. Then with interest rates of 10%, I should be able to get back my $100 together with my interest rates of $10. So in other words, I'm going to get back $110. So then you probably would ask, are you going to be better off or worse off, right? So with this $110, are you better off or worse off? Now, we can't really tell whether you are better off or worse off unless you were to tell me that if the $100 I keep now in the banks, I can, let's say, buy certain amounts of, let's say, rice, right? So I can, let's say, buy 10 or 50 kgs of rice. Okay, so suppose we are looking at these things in terms of goods now. So then we say, if I this $100, if I were to use it in time t equals to 0, I can buy 50 kgs of rice. If you were to say that after one periods in periods t equals to 1, this $100 becomes 110. If I can buy exactly the same 50 kg of rice, then I am neither better off nor worse off, right? But what if I can buy more than 50 kg? Then you say, oh, then you must be better off. If you were to buy less than 50 kg of rice, then we say you are worse off. So here would be the main difference between nominal and real interest rate. So this is really about nominal, right? So your $100 now becomes $110. That is really about nominal. But whether your 50 kgs of rice can that you sacrifice now allowed you to buy, let's say, more than 50 kgs of rice in the future, then we say you are looking at real, right? Because you're looking at goods. So when you look at monetary terms, then we say you are looking at nominal interest rate. But if you want to see how much your 110 that you can actually buy in periods t equals to 1, then you're looking at real interest rate. So as a result, we say point 3, we must adjust the nominal interest rates to take into account of expected inflations. So let's see how can we actually derive this formula here, right? So we want to not just know the formula, but we want to make sure we can derive this formula. So to see this, suppose now when we were to look at the definitions of real interest rates, so what is the meanings of this? We say now in this year, so this is periods that's t equals to 0. Then next year, we say this is periods t equals to 1. So I have one goods. So this goods is what we say the 50 kgs of rice that you are looking at. Then we say, now when you go on to the next year, what do you actually get is that you say you get 1 plus RT goods. Okay, but of course, this 1 plus RT goods can be more than 50 kg, can be less than 50 kg, or can be exactly the same as 50 kg, right? So then these things that you see is actually your 1 plus RT. So like what we say, if you were to say that you can actually get back 50 kg, right? So if you can actually get back 50 kg, then we say this real interest rates probably is actually equals to 0. Okay, but if you were to say that you can actually get back more than 50 kg, then we say your real interest rates probably will be greater than 0. And if you say now after 1 year you get back less than 50 kg, then we say the real interest rates that you get must be less than 0. So that would be the idea we have, right, for that real interest rate. So what you are getting back is really 1 plus RT. Now, so how do we see the lower panel? So the lower panel will be this. Suppose now I have this 50 kgs of rice. I still have this 50 kg of rice. Then I convert this 50 kg of rice into dollar first. And let's suppose I get $100. Okay, so I get $100. Now, so instead of consuming that 50 kg of rice by spending that $100 now, then I say, no, I don't want this rice now, but I rather keep that $100. So this $100 is actually your monetary value of your 50 kg of rice. Then suppose you keep this $100 in the bank. So what would happen is that you keep this $100 in a bank. A year later, you probably will get back 1 plus IT times that $100. Okay, so in other words, if IT is actually equals to like what we say 10%, you would then get back this amount of 1 plus IT that is equal multiplied by PT, right? Multiplied by PT will basically be, all right, now I keep that $100 in the bank, then I would have 1 plus 0.1. So I get back 110. Okay, now then I want to see whether this 110 would allow me to actually buy back. I convert this 110 now into real term, into goods. So I ask myself, right, can I actually buy back the same goods? Okay, so what you would do is that you would have, after one period, you will get this amount back, right? So you get back this amount in monetary term. But you wanted to know whether you can actually buy that 50 kg of rice. So you got to divide it by this new price of rice. Okay, so that you have to divide it by the new price of rice. So from here, then we say, but still you need to put an E term here. So this E term really stands for expectations. Why are we saying that? The reasons is because when you decide to keep your $100 now, you really do not know what is the price of rice, price of that 50 kgs of rice 1 period later. So you have to make expectations on that price. You see that? So you have to make expectations on the price. So that's why the price in the new periods is actually PT plus 1 E, right? So it's the expectations about the price of 50 kgs of rice in the future. So this is exactly what we say the real interest. So the 1 plus RT, right? So this is actually the same as the real interest rate. So that's why you get to see this formula, right? So this formula, like what you have, is exactly the one that we have seen in equations 1, right? So this is the equations 1. So why we have 1 plus RT is equals to 1 plus IT times PT divided by PT plus 1. All right. Now, then after that, the next things that we want you to know will be, we want you to understand what is the definitions of expected inflations. So the expected inflations, why we say when you have the time t plus 1, right, we always have it superscripts of E. The reasons is because now is t plus 0. Okay, that is equals to time t. So now is t plus 0. So if I want to look at t plus 1, this is always about future. So whenever it is about future, you need to make expectations about this, right? So then same things happens to inflations. I need to I am now at time t. I want to make expectations about inflations in periods t plus 1. So that's why you have the superscripts of E. Now, what is that inflations in periods t plus 1, the expected inflations will be, I will say, all right, because if you remember, we say inflation's rates is actually defined as the change in price level, right, divided by the price level. So the change in price level, we say it will always be the new price minus the old price divided by the old price. Okay. But this new price is something that I need to expect. Okay. So this new price is always something that I need to expect. So we have PT plus 1E, right? Minus PT. So this is then what we call the expected inflations, right? Now, with that, you refers back to your equations earlier on. So you from here, right? You just you go back and take a look of these equations. Then you probably see how we can actually rewrite equations 1 into equations 2, equations 3, sorry. So the earlier one we see 1 plus RT equals to 1 plus IT, right? So 1 plus IT times PT divided by PT plus 1E, okay? Now you got to rewrite this. You got to show that this one, they are basically the same, knowing that expected inflations is just PT plus 1 minus PT over PT. So what do we have, right? So let's see how can we work on this together. Okay, so I would have my very first equations. We say the very first equations is 1 plus RT equals to 1 plus IT, then PT divided by PT plus 1E. Then at the same time, we also know that expected inflations is actually being defined as the change in inflations, like that, right? So the next step you do is that you will use PT plus 1E divided by PT, then minus 1. Therefore, you will have 1 plus pi t plus 1e that is equals to this term. Now you are ready to substitute this into your first equations. So you do that substitutions, you would have it as 1 plus RT equals to, so you still have 1 plus IT, right? Now, what is this PT over PT plus 1? We say it's just the inverse of this guy, right? So it's just the inverse of this. Then I will have it as 1 plus pi t plus 1e. See that? Okay, so you just replace them inside and you get into your equations here, right? Now, so after you get these equations, the next things we want to show is that this one can be rewritten into this guy. Now you look at this guy, what is this? This is actually just to say that nominal interest rates is actually equals to real interest rates plus the expected rates of inflations, right? So we would have it like that. So now we are going to show from that equations into this one. So what should we do? So from here, right? So now we are having it here. We are going to show later on that IT should be equals to RT plus your expected rates of inflations. So we want to see the step in between. So what will be the step in between? You cross multiply, you get 1 plus RT, then multiply by 1 plus pi t plus 1e. This is going to be equals to 1 plus IT. Okay, so you just cross multiply. Then I got into this. Now you open up, right? So you expand this. Then what do I have? I will have 1 plus RT plus pi t plus 1e plus RT times pi t plus 1e. That is equals to 1 plus IT. So what I just did is that I just expand them. Now, after I expand them, then you can actually see this term and these terms can actually get cancelled out. Okay, so these two terms can get cancelled out. But now we are almost there, but not exactly the same. I already have my IT, I have my RT, I have my RT, I have my pi t plus 1e. So what is this term? So this term we say it should be equals to 0 or at least close to 0. The reasons is because you just imagine if I were to say real interest rates, let's take for example, if I were to tell you that real interest rates is equals to 0.00, that is 1%, and then the expected rates of inflations is actually equals to 2%, then is 0.02, that is equals to 2%. You multiply them, right? So your RT multiplied by pi t plus 1e. We can actually say this is actually very much close to 0. Okay, so that's why you can actually make that assumptions. And therefore, from here, you can actually see, suppose if I keep my IT on the left-hand side, I keep my IT on the left-hand side, then I will have it as real interest rates plus the expected rates of inflations, right? So this is the relationship between the nominal interest rates and the real interest rates. And we can actually call this the Fisher equations. Okay, so the Fisher equations just to tell us that suppose if real interest rates, let's say is 2%, maybe I use that same example, right? So if this is real interest rates is 1%, I expect inflation rates to be equals to 2%, then this is just to tell us that the nominal interest rate should be equals to 3%. Okay, so that's how you see why we get into these equations 4, right? Now, so that's why we say when expected inflations, best will be when expected inflations is equal to 0. Then what is going to happen is that if this guy is actually equals to 0, I don't expect any inflations, then my nominal interest rate should be the same as my real interest rate. Okay, now, but then the thing is, expected inflations is usually positive. So this guy is always positive. Therefore, based on the relationships we have seen, let's say if I were to see this, and if this is always positive, then you are just to say that my IT should always be bigger than RT. Okay, so the real interest rate should always be lower than the nominal interest rate. Or we say given the nominal interest rate, so let's say given, when you use the term given, simply means you're holding it constant. So if this guy is constant, then you say IT is equals to RT plus pi t expected inflations. If you say this guy is constant, then a higher expected inflations would imply a lower real interest rate. Okay, so that's 0.9. Now, so if I have the real interest rates being 1 minus pi e, this is based on expected inflations. So sometimes we also call this the ex-ante real interest rates, because you are looking at expectations. It have not been becomes a facts. But once you say after the facts, after it becomes a facts, then the realized real interest rate should be equals to this term. Okay, so the realized one should be equals to 1 minus pi. So you see the E actually disappear. When you need to make expectations, means it has not happened. So that's why before the facts. But after expectations, when it becomes materialized, we call it exposed. So after the fact, then you don't need to expect anymore. So you have actually just pi and without the E. So now you can see from this figure 2, right? So we look at the nominal and real interest rates for this 1-year treasury bill rates in the United States since 1978. So what do you actually get to see is that first things we get to see that nominal interest rates and real interest rate that tends to move together. So this guy is your IT, this guy is your RT. Then it must be true that the gap between these two lines have to be the rates of inflation. So this distance will have to be the rates of inflations, right? So for example, if the real interest rates is actually equals to 2%, then inflation rates is equals to 3%, then I would easily expect that this term, the nominal interest rates, which is equals to real interest rates plus the rates of inflations, right? Um, uh, by right should be, I will just use pi, I, R, and pi, okay? So just say they are already materialized, right? So then I would have it as equals to 2% plus 3%. That is actually equals to the 5%, right? So let's say, for example, it's like that. Now, but then when you have very high nominal interest rate, does that means that you are always, let's say, better off being when you have a very high nominal interest rate? Does that mean that you as a saver or a lender would always be better off? We say not really. So let's see what happens is this. So we say first we look at point 12. Nominal interest rates has declined considerably since the early 1980s. But because expected inflation has declined as well, so IT declined, but then at the same time, expected inflations also decline. So pi E also decline. Then your real interest rate, which is supposed to be equals to your nominal interest rate plus the expected rates of inflations, right? So plus the expected rates of inflations. So now what happened is they say, all right, if IT has actually declined, does that mean that RT will decrease? We say if IT decrease, pi t plus 1 is not changing, then RT is going to decrease. But if you were to say that expected inflation is also decreasing, then the real interest rates can be increasing. So in the end, what really happens to the real interest rates really depends on which one decrease by more, right? So really depends on which one decrease by more. So we say because expected inflation has declined as well, the real interest rates has declined much less than the nominal interest rate. Okay, so that's what we have. Now, then other than that, let's take a look of point 30. This figure shows the importance of adjusting for inflations. So take for example, nominal interest rates in 2006. So let's take a look of this point, 2006. So look at nominal interest rate. So nominal interest rate is this point, let's say at point A. That's my nominal interest rate. We say this is actually much lower than it was in 1981. So let's take a look of 1981. So 1981 probably would be somewhere here. Okay. Then you look at my nominal interest rates. My nominal interest rate is at point B. I can say this is IB. This one that I see is IA. Of course, very obvious from the diagrams that IB is actually much bigger than IA, right? So nominal interest rates in 1981 is a lot bigger. But let's see in terms of their real interest rate. So the real interest rate, um, What did they show? I think maybe the 20. I look at the number they have in the textbook. So it's probably somewhere here. They say is 1.4. I do not know how they get that 1.4. They probably have the number of this. So 1.4 probably would be somewhere here, maybe, right? So this is the real interest rates RB. And according to the information in your textbook, they say this is 1.4%. Okay, so RB is actually 1.4%. Then when they look at this 2006, they say these rates, this RA is actually equals to 1.7%. So what they are trying to tell is that even though the nominal interest rates in 81 is larger, but the real interest rates in 81 is actually less than the real interest rates in 2006. So that's what they are trying to tell. So what is the reasons for that? The reasons for that is because they have different expected inflations, right? So they have different expected inflations. This guy here in 1981 inflations is very large. Now, after that, the next things that I need you to see will be, this will be the main difference between the notes you see in the earlier versions and this new one. So I want to highlight this difference to you is the concept on the zero lower bound. I call it the ZLB and deflations. So zero lower bound simply means nominal interest rates is equal to zero. Now, what is the meanings of deflations? Deflation simply means inflation rates is actually negative. Or in other words, price level is declining. So that is the concept of deflations. Now, so we would first ask a few things, right? So in the IS equations, IS is about this Z equals to C plus I plus G. Then we ask what interest rate should enter. The one that's sensitive to interest rate is actually investment. So this interest rates is actually that affect investments have to be the real interest is the R. Okay, so that's why we say the interest rates that enter the IS equations have to be the real interest rate. Okay, so have to be the real one. Now, so but then what central banks control? Central banks control nominal interest rates. So central banks control nominal interest rates, right? So, but this is the one that they control. So they control this. But they know that markets will not respond to nominal interest rate. Markets respond to real interest rate. So even though they control nominal interest rate, the one that they care about is the real interest rate. The reason is because this real interest rate is the one that affects the consumptions and investments behavior. Okay, so that's something we got to keep in mind. So therefore, if the central banks want to set real interest rates, let's say equals to R, then he must choose a nominal interest rate I, so that given the expected inflation, the desired level of real interest rate. So what does that mean? That if R is equals to I minus expected inflations. So R is equals to I minus expected inflations. We actually say central bank now control this. But they care about this guy, right? So they care about this. So they say, suppose now I already know that this expected inflation is 2%. And if I know that I want real interest rates to be equals to 4%, then I know how much to set for this. I will just set this equals to 6%. Okay, so one good thing is that expected inflation is usually very stable unless you disturb it. Otherwise, we have this inflation's inertia. that the expected inflation tends to be very stable. So if I know that expected inflation is 2%, I want real interest rate of 4%, all I have to do is I set my nominal equals to 6%. So indirectly, central bank control the real interest rate. So not directly, but indirectly. But there's another concept here that we really want you to understand is this concept on liquidity trap, which we have done. So we say this liquidity trap happens because of zero lower bound. So liquidity trap happens when nominal interest rates is equal to zero. So now let's see what does that means if I have zero lower bound. So I nominal interest rate is equals to real plus expected inflations. When you have zero lower bound, when there is liquidity trap and hence zero lower bound. So what does that mean? That means this nominal interest rate is equal to zero. So if nominal interest rate is equal to zero, then your real interest rates must be equal to minus expected rates of inflations. Okay, now, so we say this I equals to zero is the lowest that nominal interest rates can go. Then the real interest rate, the lowest it can go will be minus the expected rates of inflations. So let's see what is this? We say this implies that real interest rates cannot be lower than the negative of inflations. Okay, now, so take for example, if I expect inflations to be equals to 2%, then if pi e is equals to 2%, then the lowest the real interest rates can be equals to will be minus 2%, because you're using 0 minus 2%, right? So can real interest rates be negative? The answer is yes. Nominal interest rate, we say, have that zero lower bound. That's IT should be equal to 0. But when IT is equal to 0, that is the lowest IT can go. But what is the real interest rate? Then we say the lowest real interest rates can go is the minus inflations. So long as you expect a positive inflations, then it is possible that you would have negative real interest rate. So my questions then is, what if I have expected inflations that is negative? If you have expected inflations that is negative, simply means you are expecting a deflations. Then your real interest rate, which is supposed to be equals to the minus expected inflations, if you say this guy is negative, then real interest rates become positive. So what does that mean? That means suppose now a country actually hits zero lower bound. IT is already equals to 0. I fall into liquidity trap and I have zero lower bound. Then we say first, if you expect inflations to be positive, right, then this RT, which is supposed to be equals to minus the expected rates of inflations, then we say this guy R is going to be equals to negative, going to be negative. So let's say I is equals to 0, then R is equals to this. But if you expect a deflations, then R could be equals to minus this, and now this term is minus, then the real interest rate is still positive. Okay, so you look into this example being Japan, right? So Japan's at one point experiencing deflations. So if you have a deflations, even though your I is equal to 0, it is still possible that your R is positive. Okay, so let's say, for example, if expected inflation is 2%, then the real cannot be less than 2%, right? So we say this may be low enough to increase the demands for goods by much the economy may be remains in recessions. So we say if I have situations like this, right? If I have a situations where my expected inflations is minus 2%, okay? Now, simply means during the periods of deflations, even though I let I equals to 0, it is possible that my R is positive, right? We say then this R may not be low enough for me to generate high increase in C and I. So my consumptions and investments may not actually be responding to this zero lower bound policy by the central bank. The reasons is because the real interest rate is still positive. Okay, so R and I may not respond much even with zero interest. Okay, so we say if you have a recessions, to make sure you come out from the recessions, you would want to reduce interest. But if let's say your interest is already equals to 0, then you hit the so-called zero lower bound. You can't reduce it any further. But then what happens to your real interest rate? Your real interest rate is still positive. So you still won't be able to bring your economy out from recessions, right? So we say under that kinds of situations, we need policy that goes beyond monetary policy, right? So we say we need something that goes beyond reductions in interest. All right. Now, so after this, let's move on to the next sections on risk and risk premium. So we say last time we used to assume that all bonds are having same interest rate, right? But we say the actual fact is that some bonds are more risky than the other. So in order for me to actually get you to, let's say I have two types of bonds, right? So I have two types of bonds. Then I have one that I say is a safe bonds. Another one is actually a risky bonds. So now what happens to these safe bonds? These safe bonds could be riskless, right? No risk. Okay. So then what is going to happen is because this is so safe, you have no risk. I can offer you 4% returns and you will be willing to hold that bonds already. But if I'm asking you to hold a bonds or some bonds that are more risky, then in order for me to actually encourage you to hold it, I need to attract you to come in by offering you higher returns. And these higher returns than the safe bonds is what we call the risk premium. So I get you to hold on to something riskier, but I need to pay you to hold that. And that amount that I pay you is what we call the risk premium, the additional premium. So we say some bonds are risky, so bonds holder require a risk premium. Now, so let's try to see this. So for this safe asset, safe bonds, I called it the riskless types of bonds, no risk. Usually these are the government's bond, right? Because so long as you say you have the governments there, then governments should always be able to pay you back. So the bonds issued by them is usually safer, and we call them the riskless types of bonds. So let I be the nominal interest rates on the riskless bonds. So I say this interest is I. Okay, then X be the risk premium. So X be the risk premium. So in this case, you see a premiums of 6%. You can actually say this is the risk premium, right? So, and what is the P? P here is the probability of defaulting. Means your risky bonds all screw up. You got no return at all. So we say there's probability of this risky bond go bust. Okay. Now, then what happened is investor now they need to make expected return on these risky bonds. as on the riskless bonds. All right, now let's see what is the meanings of this. Suppose I have the safe asset. Okay, so this is the riskless type. I don't have problem. I hold that bond give me a returns of I. Okay, so I put in $1. 1 year later, I get back 1 plus I. So I am fine. But there's another alternative that is the risky one. Now, what happens to this risky one? I need to ask myself, what is the expected return? So I want to ask these questions. What is the expected return? Now, to see the expected returns from this risky bond, then that's how you do it, right? So you draw it like this. This is quite common in microeconomics when you draw a note. So this is a probability note. Okay, so this is a probability note. So now two things would happen. First, I have the probability of P that this bond is going to go bust. Then I got nothing back, not even my $1 back. Okay, so I got 0. But then I have that the remaining probability of getting not just my $1 plus the return plus the 10%. This 10% is that interest plus the risk premium. You see that? So I get this 10%. This 10% is basically equals to my interest rates of I plus the risk premiums of X. You see that? Okay. So with that, then we say you can calculate expected returns. So your expected return now would be calculated as this probability, let's say, could be 0.4 probability, 40% that it's go bust, 60% that it's 60% chance that it will not go bust. If it is not going bust, then you get this much. Simply means you get your 1 plus that 10%. Okay, but here is 1 plus the 4%. Okay, so now what is the expected return from holding the risky one? We say it will be the probability of you getting nothing plus the 1 minus P chance of you getting 1 plus I plus X. Okay, so this is how you get into equations 5. So this is how we would like you to see how we derive equations 5. Okay, so equations 5 is basically being derived like that. Now, then we ask you, if that is how we calculate the expected return, right? This is for the risky asset, of course. So then what do we do? This is for the risky one, right? Then you compare. You will compare, hey, if I invest my money in the safe asset, I get this.